Okay, welcome everyone to another SDEC session. This is going to be a very unique session, very different than our normal slide presentations. This is going to be an interview with Bill Macaitis, and I'm so excited to have Bill here. Bill is my old boss at Salesforce, and I've known Bill for many years. So Bill, welcome to the SDEC.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. Always a pleasure to talk, and was excited to talk to everybody today.
Cool. So, first time for us doing this. So here's what we're going to do. I am going to ask Bill some questions, and then while I'm doing this, what I would love everyone to do is to use the Zoom Q&A and post questions, because I think the most interesting parts will be the questions from you. But I'm going to kick things off with a couple questions just to kind of get us going. So, just so you know Bill's background, I'll kind of do a little intro because Bill is too humble to do it himself. But Bill has been in the digital space forever. I believe he started at IGN.
Hmm.
And then Bill and I worked together at Salesforce during a very interesting time when the whole world was going digital. Then Bill was the CMO of Zendesk. And then Bill was one of the first marketing executives at this little tiny company that was just taking off, you might have heard of, called Slack. And then after that, Bill now has his own advisory services business where he helps out SaaS early stage startups. So was that all correct? Is that close enough?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. Thanks, Adam.
Cool. So, but I really wanted to have Bill on because a lot of us are kind of in the weeds with digital marketing and digital analytics. And, Bill has had that kind of executive perspective, and he's been a CMO before. So a lot of us only get to talk to our own CMO, but I'd like to kind of use his experience so we could all learn of what we should be thinking about and get that different perspective. So I'm going to start. Before you were a marketing executive, Bill, what were your perceptions of marketing data and how it could be used to empower business?
Well, I think we've all been on the flip side, right? Where we haven't been an executive, and I was always personally frustrated with a lot of decisions were made off politics or made off Hippo. For those not familiar, the highest paid opinion in the room, which tended to win a lot of these discussions. And to me, like, I always loved data and analytics because I thought it was democratizing. I thought it was, as opposed to just this slimy person trying to win the argument and doing Machiavellian tactics. It was like, no, here's what the data says. Let's do this, right? And I'm sure we'll go into it, but Ed and I said in many a Salesforce meeting where it was like, hey, we think this should be on the homepage. I think the users will react best to this message. Just do that. And I'm like, but why don't we ask the users? Like, let them see which one they react best to. Like, why are we doing this? So for me, like, data and analytics was a way to kind of get around with just one of the things I never really liked, which was like kind of internal company politics. And there was a certain truth and beauty to it, and it was something that I always loved and embraced. And especially coming to B2B, what I found was a lot of companies were based on really old go-to-market models, just top-down sales, and they hadn't really moved into digital. They hadn't really used analytics, and so they were just making a lot of these decisions based off hunches and guesses, and there was a lot of politics involved in that. So it was one of the reasons that I always loved it and embraced it and wanted to bring it into the organizations that I worked with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and especially when we were at Salesforce, you had people who were super successful with trusting their gut, and it
Yes.
got them to where they were. But a lot of times they didn't realize that they were moving into a new era, and so on. Uh, so
Totally.
next, so next question I have for you is: as you moved up into marketing leadership, what was your approach to building digital marketing teams, and how did you balance all of the different disciplines? Because you've got paid
Yeah.
search, you've got SEO, analytics, testing, and all of these are saying, hey, our area is the most important and we need more budget, we need more dollars. We had a crazy team of superstars over at Salesforce, but how did you kind of, bring that together and get that balance?
Yeah, great question. So, well, first off, I think like you have to come into all these with an open mind, right? Like every year, marketing and online marketing changes, and there's new specialties, and there's new advances, and there's new technologies, right? And I felt lucky enough. One of the reasons I was excited when I went to both Zendesk and Slack was I came in really early enough that it was a whiteboard, essentially, for building out like what does a modern marketing org look like. And if you're in that situation, it's really nice because you can design a really beautiful modern marketing org. But a lot of people don't inherit that, and a lot of people inherit. They'll come to a company that has been there a long time, and there was already a bunch of existing teams, and that was like when I went to Salesforce. Again, like I was kind of brought in to help modernize that digital side, but a lot of the teams were not doing any of these core functionalities around analytics and website conversion, content marketing and lifecycle nurturing, and advanced digital SEM and SEO. And so, for me, a lot of it comes down to education, of helping educate the other execs and stakeholders. Hey, what are these functions? What do they do? Why are they important? What are the KPIs? How we can grow faster, how we can materially change the business's trajectory. And as far as a resource allocation perspective, that was just going off my experience. Luckily I'd been doing this like 20 years and I'd always done online marketing. I did my first startup right out of college. Unfortunately, I didn't know there were things called VCs back then that would give you money. So we had to bootstrap it. And so, it forced me to learn all these more advanced online marketing principles because we didn't have any money, right? We had to learn how to do product-led growth and virality and conversion rate marketing and SEO, right? And so I think you just have to come into it open-minded and, for any team that wants to grow, I think you have to think about like, hey, how can we align to whatever the company's goals are? If the company's top 3 goals are X, Y, and Z, well, how does my team help support that? How does it help accelerate it? A good piece of advice I got once too was, draw out your org and draw out your future org, right? Like here's your current org, whatever team you are, right? Even if you're one team, it's just if you're like the conversion rate optimization team, show it like, hey, in a year or 2 years, here's what I think the end state team should be. And here's what each person's going to do and focus on and specialize. Here's their KPIs, and here's how they're going to support our business's goals. That sometimes works a lot better than just like complaining about like, hey, I'm overloaded and I have too much work, and just give me more money or give me more heads.
Yeah, I know when we were together at Salesforce, I mean, one of the things that our analytics team really focused on is could we make a spreadsheet that actually proved how much money we were saving the organization or making the organization? And what was great about working with you is we would say, hey, listen, we've run these tests, we've optimized the site in this way, we've just saved a couple $1 million. Let's now reinvest that and invest in testing. And you were always like, cool, go for it. So cool.
That was a great idea. I love that you did that, right?
Yeah.
Like that was, I mean, first off, to everyone in the call, I feel lucky to have worked with Adam the Great. Adam the Great. Wow, what an honor.
Stop.
Seriously. He is amazing. But yeah, like those type of things are important, right? Especially, see, the thing I think we forget is that when we do a lot of this like digital, pure play, online, whatever it is, analytics, SEO, commercial rate optimization, like we know it, right? And we know it really well. But the higher you go up in the organization, the more they have no idea what you're doing, and you really have to spend a lot of your time on education, on showing the impact, on having a steady drumbeat. And the teams that are really successful, like devote time to that. The teams that I found that struggle with that just are 100% head down and just doing the task of the day and never think about communicating out that value and aligning to whatever the company's goals are. So, like an exercise like that is hugely helpful.
Yeah, and for all of those of you on the call, one of the things that I learned from Bill, which I'll never forget, is, he explained to me at Salesforce, like he said, don't keep your head down all the time. You're actually a cheerleader, and part of your job is change management. And I would spend way more time than I thought was necessary to go out and have lunch with people and explain what our team could do. And in some cases, maybe even put people on the spot and say, do you know what our lead conversion rate is? And really kind of almost like embarrass them into realizing that they didn't know what was going on. But I do think that I thought this was a waste of time, honestly, when Bill first told me it. But in the end, our team ended up getting a really good reputation. And whenever I went to Bill and said, I need more money, I need more headcount, he would then go out to the different stakeholders and they would say, oh yeah, well, Adam's team seems like they're really doing a lot of stuff. So yeah, I'm all for that. So you can't underestimate a little bit of cheerleading. And sometimes it feels like you're patting yourself on the back, but it's really, like Bill said, just a lot about education. And kind of wrapping in there, the most ironic thing we had at Salesforce is we had two individuals, Mark Benioff,
Yes.
who is a very powerful man. And then we had George who I believe is over at Twilio right now.
Yeah.
Mark is kind of the epitome of trusting your gut in many cases because he's done super well. And then you've got George who was basically probably the most data-driven person
Yes.
I've ever seen in my life, where he literally, if you go into his office, it's hard to get out of there without playing chess. So how did you manage kind of like going up with people like that?
I think, what saved my sanity is at some point I said, um, look, no matter what the company is, you're going to have some people that are very visual, that are very emotional, that are very like follow your gut. And you're going to have, other people that are very data driven, right? And want to see the numbers. And different people react differently, right? Like, and every company is going to have those archetypes. Like, don't get frustrated by them,
Yeah.
Kind of embrace it. Just go, hey, like, if I want to be a successful marketer or successful at what I do, I have to talk to people differently. Obviously, if you walk in a room, if you're at like a dinner party and you walk over and this person is an artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
if you go to them and you're talking about a topic and you're like, oh, well, I think they should increase taxes because it'll generate 32.4% more revenue or this or that, versus like saying, hey, like if we create this new program, it's going to enable all these new artists to come and do amazing things. Like, people react differently to how you're trying to persuade them and the
Yeah.
arguments you give. And so it was fun, and I learned a ton. Mark is just a force of a personality, but also just a brilliant, sales and marketing mind.
Yeah.
And we were lucky. A lot of companies don't have an extroverted CEO, right? A lot of them have, I think in tech, it's more common to have like an introverted CEO that doesn't ever want to talk to
Yeah.
customers or press. And so we were able to leverage that for us. But when you talk with like a personality like George, like I said, very data minded, but I thought in a great way, very open minded. And again, for me, like someone who didn't like politics, like, hey, when you could come in and just show the data and have someone that would listen to it and understand it, that could tremendously help further your cause as well.
Yeah. And George, for those of you out there, you've probably heard, if you're a digital analyst, you should always try to present a little bit less to the executives, but always have stuff in the appendix so that if they
Yes.
ask you detailed questions, George, who is the way I learned that lesson, we would literally, it felt like
Get
it
stuck
felt
on a
like we lived
slide.
for the West Wing, where we'd be on a slide and he'd be like, I want to see the data behind that. I want to see the data behind that. So we would actually present 4 or 5 slides, but we'd probably have 60 or 70 slides in the deck just in case, because he would drill you on anything.
Massive
Uh,
appendix slides. Yes.
Yes. So I learned that the hard way. Cool. So after Salesforce, and then you went over to Zendesk, and this was
Yeah.
really your first opportunity that I know of, like where you could call the shots. You were the CMO. You probably inherited a marketing stack at that point. But how did you approach being a new first time CMO and basically just saying, okay, I've learned a lot at Salesforce. Like I want to apply that here. Like what was your approach there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, I was so excited. It was an open blank canvas where I could come in and build a really modern go-to-market engine. It was one of the things that kind of shocked me a little bit when it came, I guess when we both came to the B2B side. I would run across companies that had pretty innovative products that were SaaS or cloud enabled, but had for whatever reason just embraced like a 30-year-old dusty B2B playbook that was around sending out press releases, holding field marketing events, and selling top down into the organization via high paid account executives, right?
Mhm.
And I wanted to be more modern marketing, right? Like take a lot of the tips and strategies I learned the first half of my career on the B2C side and apply it to the B2B element. So, like I said, I was in a really fortunate position where it was pretty much a white space, and I wanted to bring in all these core teams around content, SEO, analytics, conversion, life cycle nurturing, and do them in a more modern way and have the right KPIs that align to them. And also, like a big part of my DNA too is to do it in a customer centric way. And so for me being a data person, a lot of companies will be like, oh, it's all about the customer, right? But then it's like, all right, well, how are our leads doing, right? Where's the sales? And I wanted to bring into a company that said like, hey, we care about the customers. We're going to start measuring customer experience metrics. So like I brought in Net Promoter Score, and that was hard. Like even a company like Zendesk, who kind of were measuring it, but they were measuring it in a really crappy way. They only measured it to like, when I came in, they were only measuring it once a year. To someone who made it to a year on their 1 year anniversary that was sent a birthday cake, and only to the owner of the account. Like they weren't even measuring to the actual users, right?
Users,
Like people that use it, right? And they, and what about all the people that didn't make it to a year, right? But like, so the process of bringing that in, like Net Promoter Score to Zendesk, if you kind of believe the battle is just, oh, you just need to bring it in and just do it, like it would have failed like horribly, miserably. Like I had to spend so much of my time doing so many meetings and lunches and evangelizing and going to all hands. And I mean, like if I had a tattoo, it would have been NPS, because that's how much I was talking about it, like how important it is that we, measure this and listen to it and take actions and build a product roadmap off what people are saying. Like for instance, at the time, everyone was, our product owner was building all these super advanced functions like triple regression forecasting modules, and that supposedly, our advanced customers needed. And we do the NPS survey, and they're like, we get all these responses, and all the customer support agents rate us really low. And they're like, hey, can you just make the app load faster? Like I'm doing tickets 10 hours a day. It takes 5 seconds for each ticket to load up, And so like to do that though, to bring that data-driven like philosophy was a lot of evangelism. And that was really hard to do. But I'm glad we did it, and having a white space allowed us to kind of build out the teams to support that and run it.
Cool. So, and you mentioned B2B. Your next destination was Slack, when
Yes.
most people had heard of Slack, but it was kind of a little fuzzy what it was. So, as the first executive hired at Slack, other than the founders, obviously it was in its kind of infancy, and it was a whole new product, but one that was just like crazy viral. I think you used to call it the risky rocket ship. Like you've no idea where this thing
Yes.
could go. Uh, so I'm dying to kind of hear, what was your approach to marketing and
Yeah.
growing Slack? Because in this case, it was almost like it's a weird B to C in some respects, because it's like used by business people, but it was almost like taking off like a Twitter. So, so tell our folks kind of like how
Yeah.
you approach that.
Yeah. Super fun. So I joined Slack, I think around 50 employees, but I was really the first marketer. I joined as CMO, and I later would lead up the marketing, sales, success, and support. So all the customer facing teams. It was interesting because when I joined Slack, it was growing fast, but at the same time, no one knew about it. Like one of the first things I did was we started. Well, first team I built, ops and analytics, most important team in marketing. Got to build that up. And then after I hired, a couple people that I really trusted, I was like, hey, I want to run awareness metrics studies. So basically, like in marketing, again, I think there's like all these pipeline metrics, like sales and MQLs and conversion rates and all that. Then there's these awareness-based metrics, which you can measure: aided recall, unaided recall, share voice, sentiment, share conversation. And we started measuring them, and we found is that no one knew about us. Like really, there was like this population and like really hardcore tech that knew about us, but outside of that,
Yeah.
no one knew about us at all. So, for me, it was growing, but we had to start thinking about like, hey, how do we define the brand? So big things were like, what is our visual identity? What is our editorial tone and voice? How do we start creating content around this? We spent a lot of time on kind of the growth hacking elements of it. So we had give 100, get 100. We spent a lot of time in pricing and packaging. So, Slack was one of the first ones where we really aligned our pricing to usage. So if you stop using Slack, your admin would get an email that said, an email or a Slack message that said, hey, Joanna has stopped using the product. We're going to give you a credit or a refund back. And that was different, right? Like most SaaS companies didn't do that. we spent a lot of time there. We spent a lot of time on doing more larger campaigns, a lot of times on content, a lot of times that we could build it out. Now, the B2C was always interesting, right? Because we did have a lot of people using it. And, what we found out was that pretty much everywhere people hated email. It was pretty
Yeah.
universal. And so, Slack worked pretty well if you were organizing your local soccer team, or it worked really well if you were, managing communications within your, the marketing department at your company. But what, part of it too, to be honest with you, was focus, because it was hard to support all those. And so pretty early on, we actually made a conscious decision to say, hey, like, we're really going to focus the most on selling to businesses, because there's different dynamics, right? When you're a consumer, you might not want your email and phone number exposed to everyone on the list or the group that you're a part of, right? Or you might need to moderate. You might need to ban people. Like, if you're part of a business, you don't just ban,
Yeah.
Julie on the PR team because she pissed you off. You can't just do that, right? So
Yeah.
it was a totally different set of functionality, and I think allowing us to focus on it was important. But like the PLG element, the conversion rate optimization, the the pricing and packaging, tweaking with the freemium model, like that was a big part of our focus. That and the brand, and I think that allowed us to accelerate that growth even further.
Yeah, and one thing I remember you telling me back in the day was at the time, Slack didn't really invest that much in sales. I think early days it didn't even have any salespeople. But I think one of the things that you mentioned was that, and this is probably from your Zendesk experience, is that you put a lot of emphasis on customer support.
Yeah.
And I think your viewpoint, which I had never really thought of before, was, we can go and try to market as much as we can, but if the people who are already using the product love the support, if they get answers right away, and if it's fun, because I know a lot of the people there were pretty witty in the way they would respond and so on, but if they got immediate answers to their questions, which in the early days of Slack, and I think even still today, I'm sure it's harder because it's large. I mean, it was like wicked fast to get answers. I think the philosophy you had was, hey, they'll go tell their friends, and then we start getting word of mouth. Was that something that was intentional, or was that just kind of a byproduct of something
No,
else you're
yeah.
doing?
Great question. That was a very intentional, deliberate decision. Fun fact, biggest functional team at Slack was support from the
Yep.
early days, from as long as I was there, and I managed that for a while as well. And I would always advocate for it, because you're right. Like, I think of the brand holistically. The brand isn't your logo or your slogan. The brand is a sum of every little interaction that someone has with you. And
Yep.
when people have trouble with your product, I don't care how good your SaaS product is, people are going to have trouble with it, right? You have that moment where either they're going to go, whoa, like, I either got the response really fast, I posted on Twitter and they responded like in 30 seconds, or they solved the issue, whatever problem I was happening. And you either come out of that little interaction with, oh my God, these guys are amazing. Like, oh yeah,
Yep.
like all my friends should check them out. Or, oh, that company was horrible, right? Like, I'm
Yep.
never going to use them again. And, my mind, I was telling you, NPS tattoo, I don't have it, but I did have a tattoo. I put one there. I think of the world as like, you're either minting out promoters or detractors,
Yep.
and we wanted a world where you would mint out promoters, right? And people would have such a good experience at the product level, at the sales level, at the support level, that they would go out and recommend you. And to do that, we had to do things differently. So another thing we did along with that, we talked about support, but eventually we did bring in a sales team. And by the way, you do need sales if you're going to sell into enterprises. It's really,
Mhm.
you have to go through procurement and legal and infosec and
Yeah.
line of business. It's hard to do that in a self-service manner. But what we tried doing differently is, for our sales team, we said, hey, after someone had bought from us, we would survey them and we go, hey, Julie was your account executive. How helpful was she? How courteous was she? How responsive was she? How knowledgeable was she? We wanted to create metrics around the experience, not just because I feel like we've all had that experience where someone has badgered you into buying them, and you bought the car from the lot, but you're still like, oh, that was a horrible experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus like, oh wow, and I think we've all worked with great salespeople that were like, oh my God, like yeah, Alex, he was amazing and he was so helpful and knowledgeable, and I didn't feel pressure, and just really helped me out, right? Like those shaped the brand, and that was a big intentional part of our growth strategy.
Yeah, and I think what we have to kind of not lose sight of is even as digital analysts, we're there to impact the experience people have on the website. If they can find things faster, if we could make a better journey, all of that actually does
Yeah.
implicitly help the brand. And it's just important that you make sure everyone in your organization knows that.
Yeah. If
So maybe
maybe even just
oh, sorry, go
let me
ahead.
jump out of that real quick, Adam, because I think it's so important. Because a lot of times what happens is the execs, like crazy execs like me, will go, "Yeah, I want customer experience, but I don't know how to measure it," right? Or so, that's usually what I'll hear. And I've done it long enough that I'm like, "Oh, I can know what to measure." But a really good example is like, hey, if you're on the analytics team, and you could go like, "Hey, we need to do like start tracking page load time." Right? Or
Yeah.
we need to do like a CSAT survey after they leave the website. Did they have a good experience or not? Those are two like really great, solid experience-based metrics that you could probably pull or put together or bring in the right tech to allow you to measure that. But sometimes like
Yeah.
an exec out there wants to do that, but doesn't have the metrics or doesn't know which metrics they could use. So you're in an incredible position to help empower that movement if you believe in it, right? Like if you believe in
Yeah.
the customer centric approach, like you're in a great position to help enable that.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. 2 weeks ago, a company that I advise, a company called Decibel Insight, was just acquired by another company, Medallia. Medallia does on-page feedback and NPS scores, and
Nice.
then Decibel uses machine learning to use what people are scrolling and moving their mouse to determine if they're having a good experience. So
Super
they have
cool.
just done an acquisition which is saying, one, we're going to figure out, what you tell us if you like us, and then we're going to look at what you're telling us by your mouse movements. But it's so
Sure.
interesting how the worlds are kind of coming together of digital and so on.
That's
Uh,
awesome. I love it.
Cool. So, our group are mainly digital marketers and digital analysts. And I know you touched upon this a little bit, but I want to make sure that you give them some real concrete advice. They're trying to impress their bosses. They're trying to figure out, I've got 40 hours, 50 hours a week to work. As a digital marketer, a digital analyst, like what is your best advice of how they should spend their time to make sure that the organization does better and that they move up and get promoted? What's your kind of career advice for a digital marketer, digital analyst?
All right. Here's my best piece of advice. This is literally the best one. I think someone gave it to me. I'm going to pass it along. You're going to be in a position where you're going to make a lot of decks about all these numbers and answers and insights you've done. You need to build these decks and don't put more than 10 words of text per slide. That's it. Make them visual, make them impactful, one idea per slide. Your career will go so much further if you can just adhere to that principle. Because most people, especially on the analytics side, which again I've been part of and I've done, is to cram these slides with so much density. Whatever the report is, a slide, a report, it's just, oh, this and this and this and this and this and this, right? And the entire slide is just full of text and there's 17 different charts and, the execs or whoever are looking at it like, what? Right? And if you can just more get into a mindset of like, hey, I'm just going to make one really important idea on the slide. I'm going to think of the accompanying visual and I'm, and I'm going to talk about it, right? Because most of these times, like you have a chance to present. Like you're going to talk about these slides. You're not going to write everything down on the slide. You're going to talk about them. So I once saw this person, I think it was in Chicago, and I was watching them do a presentation. And they did their entire presentation. All their slides were visuals, full bleed visuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that was awesome. And that was actually Adam. I I watched one of your presentations, and I remember to this day, I'm like, oh god, he's using full bleed. Like this is great, right? And he's just speaking to these visuals, right? Where he could have written, paragraphs on each slide, and everybody been looking at the slides like, wait, what? Hold on, I have to read this. But he used visuals. Kudos to
Yeah.
you, right? Like a lot of people don't do it. So, anyways, that's a very small tactical one, but I kid you not, like when I kind of started doing that, like it really helped me because again, like you have to realize like your career is going to be based on your ability to project ideas and convince people on them, right? You're all around
Yeah.
data, especially in the data side, right? So you're going to have to get good at being able to communicate with people, and a huge part of that is making the complex simple, like taking all these different pieces and coming up with a coherent strategy, talking about the story over 10 slides, having the supporting visuals, and not getting too into the weeds on any one particular slide. Have your appendix, but
Yeah, yeah.
tell a clean story to start with.
Yeah, I mean, and a couple of things that I'll add to that is I remember we were trying at Salesforce to do a major project of tying together a lot of systems, and I think one of the things that
Yeah.
Bill
Project
helped
Golden Key.
Golden Key, and
I remember.
what Bill helped me is to say, listen, don't talk about where the data is coming from and so on. Talk about a example of what the day in the life would be of a person at Salesforce if we had Project Golden Key and said someone today walks in and sees they got to go here and here and here and here, but Golden Key, you'd be able to do this. So that was really helpful. And the other thing that that I learned from Bill that I would highly recommend all of you think about is if you do have a big decision point, Bill would recommend to me to go find who's the key stakeholders who are going to be in the meeting a week earlier and meet with them and convince them a week earlier. Because Bill was like, you don't want to be blindsided and have someone be against you. If they're against you, you'd rather know a week earlier so you could try to prepare for that. And if you do a good job convincing them a week earlier, then when the big meeting happens, you already have a bunch of advocates in the room. So it sounds a little political, but unfortunately, life sometimes can be political.
Great
So
points. Great points.
cool. Okay. Well, Bill, thank you so much. Now, what we're going to do is open it up to questions. So, if any of you on the call have a question for Bill, please go ahead and use the Zoom Q&A, and I'm going to start reading those off.
Awesome. Yeah. So we got 7 of
So,
them already.
yeah. So first question, what is your view on job hopping? It says, per your LinkedIn profile, look at these analysts. They're already looking you up. You were at most places for at least 3 years. Is that the only way to truly advance your career and compensation?
So first off, make a really good LinkedIn page. I don't know if mine's, not saying mine's great, but spend time on it. I mean, that's how recruiters are going to find you. This is not, I will get to your question. Also answer every call from a headhunter that calls you, because even though you might not like that job, they may have one down the road, and it's good to be helpful for them. So maybe you don't want that job, but maybe you know someone that might like it, right? Like, be helpful, develop that network. I think the term, I don't know if 3 years is the magic amount. I will say sometimes execs or recruiters will get a little antsy if, like, you have a whole bunch of 1 year stints or less than 1 year stints. Like, that's a little bit of a red flag, I think, where people look at it. Conversely, I think, like, if you've been at a company for 10 years, people sometimes are gonna be like, whoa, like, that's a super long time. Like, what was going on? Or can you adapt to a different type of culture? So for me, I don't know if I was intentional with saying it's 3 or 4 years. I just, like, to me, that was a natural evolution to where, like, I felt I'd made an impact and I was looking for a new challenge, or some cool opportunity came up. And it's generally, I think, like, within a company, like, you have the easier opportunity to move up in title, but when you move to a new company, you have the easier opportunity to make a big jump in comp. Because usually, like, the company that's hiring you is usually going to be paying market rate. And a lot of times when you're at a company for a while, you don't, like, market's going so fast up that they just don't match that. But if you're part of a company, you can usually advance in your title higher, though. So anyway, it's a little bit of a micromechanics, ultimately, provide value, be helpful. And I think usually your career is going to take off on its own. But those are some things that I've looked at.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll throw out there that I've thought about doing, but I don't generally change jobs that often. But if I were doing that, I love the idea of putting on your LinkedIn profile or your resume the reason why you left every job. Now, not obviously like selling out someone, but saying,
I had
I
this
went
horrible
from
manager,
job.
Bill.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
ran
this guy
away as
Bill.
fast as I could.
But yeah, but I think the idea of saying, I had gone as far as I could go and I had an opportunity to take on a more senior role, because I think that's
Sure.
the question they really have is, why did you job hop? So if you do have a little job hopping, add a little sentence that explains so that they know, okay, well, that I would understand why that person took that job.
And can I add one more to that? I'm sorry, I know we've got a bunch of questions here. If I had to give one piece of career advice beyond create simple slides, like, just be opportunistic. You never know when that rocket ship's going to come along, and although in life it can be scary to maybe move to a new city or to, move from B2C to B2B or whatever it is, just, be opportunistic, right? Those opportunities are all around you. And I've known some people that have had many opportunities in front of them and just for whatever reason never took it, right? And sometimes it's scary, but sometimes you just take that opportunity. Maybe it's an area you haven't been in, but you're really curious about, or maybe it's a super fast growing company or whatever it is. Like, be opportunistic.
Yep. Okay, next question, and we might have to do power round with short answers.
Lightning round.
How do you stay up to date with the massive ecosystem of like 8,000 plus chief martech technologies and so on? Like, how do you recommend marketers stay on top of all of the stuff that's going on? It seems like it's
Read,
going really
read, and
fast.
read. You just got to recognize like there's new ones coming out. When I learned SEO, I just spent 2 weeks every day after work, and I spent like 5 hours reading every single SEO forum I could. And I felt after 2 weeks, I'm like, I think I know SEO pretty good. I'm not saying I'm like an absolute best at it, but like you just have to devote yourself. You just have to recognize like marketing, there's always new tech coming at you, and you have to devote time to
Yep.
stay current and top of it.
Okay. When trying to promote the usage of the analytics function, services, and products, from your experience, what practices worked and which ones didn't work? What are bad practices of trying to promote the analytics function at a company?
I think be consistent with your reporting. So show the same KPIs in the same fashion, because people they start to understand it and grok it and start tracking it. And if you're constantly changing the format or you're adding or subtracting KPIs all the time, or again just super dense, it's hard for people to kind of like rally around that, and they get their eyes glaze over.
Yeah. So someone had asked, for non-believers, what are the best approach to sell data-driven projects? So if you've got an angry hippo, I guess.
So yeah, I remember like so at Salesforce, I sat right next to the creative team, and these were the ones that would make the ads or make the page designs. And I remember they're some of the nicest people, but they were like the furthest from self-admitted, right? They were not going into Omniture or Google Analytics and looking at all the analytics. And I remember like one time I went to them and I said, hey, why don't you make two versions of that? And they did. And like the one they really liked, like whatever, the hippo said, I want to use the other one. And I'm like, hey, you know what? Like if you can make multiple versions, like I work with this really smart guy, Adam, and we can put in this like testing infrastructure where we could test both of them. And then we could actually see like if your version wins. And I remember they're like, yeah, that's pretty cool. It sucks. Like I never get to have any say in like which one goes out and so even for someone that was like not involved in data or really in reports, like if you can kind of like address and like make it a little bit more democratization or a little more fun, right? Like we would try to do things like, hey, guess who's the winner? Like we knew who the winner is, but like everybody vote and maybe put money on like which is the winning version. You kind of make it fun for some people because not everybody is like a data junkie or a quant. Like I get it. Like you got to make it fun and kind of like think about like how you can get them engaged.
We could do final four brackets with
There you go.
A, B, C, and D, and the answer will always be University of Illinois will win the Final Four. Bill and I are both Illinois grads, so we're a number one seed. So someone had a follow-up to your slide deck recommendation of being very visual, not a lot of words. Their question is, what happens if that deck ends up like being filtered up all the way through to executives and higher level, and then they're just staring at a bunch of pictures and they don't know what to do? Like, how do you complement that in case they're not in the meeting?
So, look, I think like if you're like Adam or you're like and you're at a conference, you can do like a full bleed, only visuals. But for most decks, what I like to say is like think of the narrative, think of the story, and think about like 10 slides, how you can tell that story, and just have one idea per slide. And that the idea of the slide could be in the header, or it could be a little subtext. I found some of the best slides, at least when it came to analytics and reporting, was they would show a chart, but then they would have a little text bubble on top of the chart that had like the conclusion. Like, hey, this test to SMB worked, right? Or, we're experiencing a decline in Latin America due to Y, right? Yep. So, tell that story. And that way, if it gets forwarded on, you're still going to be able to see the story. It's like I've seen so many decks that are so dense that have no story, that just is like crap and more crap, just so much information, and you just
Let me
those get
let me show
deleted.
you how smart I am. That's
Yeah,
I
right.
call those decks. So okay, so another question. For some of us, we get into the technical weeds. So one of the questions that came in is analytics is a lot about the technical coding, proper data collection, and so on. And if there's bad data, everything goes south. However, coding tends to be given very little importance in the analytics world, and I'm sure there's not an executive out there who is, asking you, hey, how rock solid are your JSON objects? How do you if you're a technical person, how do you recommend that you get that importance bubbled up? Because like at Salesforce, we had like Josh West. I'm sure there's no executives who knew what Josh West was doing, but none of our stuff would happen without a Josh West. So how do you kind of argue or fight for that technical side?
Um, Again, I think whether it's that or any other thing, you have to get to know who are the key stakeholders. Have lunch with them, talk with them. Like, hey, this is. I know you may think it, but this person is really important to what we're doing, or we need to have really good data hygiene because otherwise, if you present these numbers, they may not be right, or we're not gonna be able to track them consistently. For instance, like I think like I'm a big geek on multi-touch attribution modeling, and that's really like going into like the specifics of like, hey, do we have the right data hygiene? How are we collecting this? How many interactions is someone having with us? And you have to tell that story. I've had to tell that story 1,000 times. Why we shouldn't just use first or last touch, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that seems to work. I see all these charts and they seem to be telling me which source is driving leads and all that. And I'm like, well, peel the onion. Have you gone behind that? Like this person may have
Yeah.
had 7 interactions with us. Like maybe the last thing they usually always do is a Google SEM brand search. Does that mean we should give Google our money? What about all these steps that nurtured them and didn't, right? So I think ultimately, like just being able to communicate, tell those stories, understand who are the key stakeholders, build relationships, which sometimes is more than just running the reports. Like you have to
Yeah.
get out there and not in a political way, but more just in an altruistic way. Like, hey, this is important. Like if data hygiene is important to you, you have to go out and communicate that and put it on a platform and talk about it a lot and show
Yeah.
people that you're passionate about it.
And one aside, Bill, you may not remember this, but we actually at Salesforce had a period of time where all of a sudden, due to a technical glitch, all of our paid search stopped. And I remember we were all running around freaking out, like, oh my God, we got to get with Google, we got to get our paid search. And I remember Bill pulling us into a conference room and said, hang on, let's take a breath. We wouldn't have done this on our own, but what an amazing opportunity this is for us to see how really impactful paid search is, and will SEO pick up the slack? And so that was really,
Great
to
test.
me, that was like an unforced A/B test, but it was so great that Bill was able to say, you know what, let's just chill out and let's use this as a learning opportunity, which is why I'm sure you're a great parent. Uh, Okay, last question, right in your wheelhouse. So imagine you have a new but growing SaaS company that doesn't have a formalized analytics function, and they come to you as an advisor and they seek your advice on, when should we start doing analytics and how deep should we go in analytics in an early stage startup? What's your advice? Like, what are the first couple things you should do when you know that they're all running around wearing 20 different hats?
Look, I think you need to tell them the story on why you need to build out that team and why it should probably be the first team. Usually, when I work with, all I do now is I advise startups, right? And I help them. And a lot of it is like, they're like, hey, well, we build a marketing team. Who should we hire and what are the key functions?
Mm-hmm.
And I usually say, like, hey, marketing ops is your first one because, and the story behind it is like, look, you need to, because marketing is all about spending people time and dollars, right? And if you want to at some point be able to know, like, is it working or not?
Yeah.
You need to have the proper ops and analytics and reporting in the infrastructure to tell you that, right? Like multi-touch attribution modeling is tough. It's hard to get in and it takes some time and energy, but it's going to be able to tell you and guide you to efficiently use that capital, right?
Yeah.
Because eventually, as a marketing leader, like you will get asked, did this work, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, even though you said like I was the head honcho at Zendesk, like there's always another head honcho above you. So when you go to CEO, then you have a board above you, right? And I've been in many board meetings. So whatever your strategy is, they're like, well, did that work? You ran this big campaign, right? And being able to say,
Yeah.
oh, well, actually aided recall went up by 2 points and in our core target market, or we understand the MQLs had this impact, like that's really powerful. So I think ultimately, like, I would go there again. Put yourself in the shoes of the person that's going to make this decision, and then go, hey, what are the types of decisions they're going to have to explain, and visualize to them how having a team in place with the right infrastructure, the right tech stack is going to allow them to be able to tell those stories in a more data-driven way.
Awesome. Okay, well, we are at time. So hopefully this was an interesting A/B test for the SDEC of not hitting you with 30 slides in 30 minutes. So we'll see. We'll get some interesting feedback. But Bill, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. It's always great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Adam. Thank you for having me, and great questions, everyone.
Okay, everyone, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, guys.
Okay, bye, guys.